The sun hung high in the cerulean sky, casting a golden glow over the MS Zenith. Passengers lounged by the pool, laughter mingling with the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. I, a lowly deckhand, often found solace in the routine of my work. But this day felt different, tinged with an unsettling aura I couldn't shake off. Rebecca Corium was the heart of the ship. At 32, she had an infectious spirit, always rallying the children for games, her laughter echoing down the corridors. I admired her from afar. Her zest for life reminded me of the dreams I had long buried. But on the morning of March 22nd, 2017, she vanished, and the entire ship was plunged into a murky nightmare. Her absence went unnoticed at first. As I mopped the deck, the clock ticked away, and the hours melted into one another. When I heard whispers of her disappearance, I shrugged it off. People misplaced themselves all the time on a ship this size. But when I learned her cabin remained untouched, my heart sank. The crew launched a frantic search. I watched from the shadows, blending into the wood and steel of the ship as they called her name, the echoes bouncing off the walls like a ghostly chorus. "Rebecca!" they shouted, but only silence answered. My thoughts flickered back to last night. I had finished my shift around 3 a.m., passing through the crew area when I spotted her. She stood, phone pressed to her ear, her face pale and drawn, tears glistening like stars in her eyes. It was a fleeting moment, but something about her intensity struck me. I wanted to approach her, but the weight of her sorrow felt like a barrier I couldn't breach. Now, that moment replayed in my mind, taunting me with its ambiguity. Days passed without a trace. The cruise line insisted it was an accident. She must have fallen overboard, they said, their voices devoid of emotion, as if rehearsed. But I knew better. Rebecca was a strong swimmer. She wouldn't just slip away into the abyss. I began to piece together the fragments of that night, gathering whispers from crew members who had seen her last. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed they heard shouting. Others swore they saw a shadowy figure near the railings just before she disappeared. I couldn't ignore the chilling possibility that something sinister lurked beneath the surface. My gut told me that Rebecca had been taken, but by whom? And why? Determined to find answers, I scoured the ship, searching for clues hidden in the nooks and crannies. Late at night, when the ship lay still and quiet, I found myself wandering the deserted hallways. I stumbled upon a locked storage room, an area rarely accessed by crew. My heart raced. Could this be where they hid the truth? With a bit of ingenuity, I managed to pry the door open. Inside, darkness enveloped me like a shroud. I fumbled for my phone, using its light to cut through the black. Boxes lay stacked haphazardly, filled with discarded items, but one box caught my attention. It was smaller, inconspicuous, tucked away in the corner. My pulse quickened as I opened it. What I found inside sent chills down my spine, a collection of photographs, snapshots of crew members taken from strange angles, and they were all watching Rebecca. Each picture told a story of obsession, of eyes lurking in shadows, of someone who had been watching her every move. Suddenly, a noise echoed behind me, the creaking of the ship twisting in the night. I spun around, heart racing, but the darkness was silent once more. I had to leave. Clutching the box, I slipped out, the heavy weight of dread settling in my stomach. Over the next few days, I pieced together a timeline. Rebecca's emotional phone call, the photographs, the rumors of a shadowy figure. It all began to weave a tapestry of horror. I confided in a few trusted crew members, but they dismissed my fears as paranoia. I felt increasingly isolated, as if I were the only one who understood the danger lurking on the MS Zenith. Then, on a particularly stormy night, while the ship rocked violently against the waves, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood at the edge of the railing, silhouetted against the lightning-lit sky. It was too dark to make out a face, but the stance was unmistakable. Someone was waiting. I couldn't breathe. I rushed up to the deck, every instinct screaming at me to confront whatever horror lay ahead. As I neared, the figure turned. I froze, caught in a web of fear and disbelief. It was Rebecca, or what remained of her. Her eyes were vacant, a hollow shell of the vibrant woman I had known. The moment felt suspended in time as I reached out to her, but she merely stared past me, into the dark waters below. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. I took a step forward, but just then she vanished, swallowed by the shadows. I fell to my knees, panic surging through me. I knew I had to escape. I raced back to my cabin, the box of photographs clutched tightly in my hand, desperate to prove that I wasn't crazy. As I slammed the door behind me, I felt the oppressive weight of darkness closing in. Days turned into weeks, and the MS Zenith continued its voyage. The crew acted as if nothing had happened, but I was forever haunted by Rebecca's voice and the haunting truth hidden within the photographs. I never returned to the ship. To this day, her disappearance remains unsolved, a chilling echo of a life cut short. And every time I close my eyes, I see her standing at the edge of that railing, whispering for help. A ghost trapped in the depths of the ocean, her story left unfinished, forever lurking beneath the surface of the waves. I never imagined my Alaskan cruise aboard the Star Princess would lead me into the depths of something so chilling. The ship glided through the icy waters, surrounded by breathtaking glaciers and the majestic silence of nature. Little did I know beneath that beauty lurked a haunting past. As soon as I boarded, I felt an odd energy. A friend had insisted I join this trip for some much-needed respite, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the stories I overheard, whispers of a ghostly figure that roamed the ship's corridors, particularly during the night. I dismissed them as drunken tales, remnants of overactive imaginations. But then I learned about Sarah. In 2006, a young woman named Sarah had met a tragic fate aboard this very vessel. The circumstances were murky. Accident or foul play. As I sat on the deck, sipping my drink, I felt the chilling weight of her story seep into the air. Passengers often claimed to have seen her, a spectral figure with long dark hair and haunting blue eyes. I chuckled nervously, thinking it was just folklore meant to spice up a dull vacation. That first night, I turned in early, hoping to shake off the lingering unease. I fell into a restless sleep, only to be jolted awake by an inexplicable chill in the air. My cabin door creaked slightly, and as I rubbed my eyes, I noticed the temperature had plummeted. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and a sense of dread washed over me. Then I saw her. At the foot of my bed stood the translucent figure of a young woman. Her eyes were an icy blue, filled with an unearthly sorrow that froze me in place. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. All I could do was stare as she seemed to reach out to me, her mouth forming silent cries for help. Just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished, leaving behind a bitter cold that clung to the room. My heart raced as I fought to comprehend what I had just witnessed. It felt surreal, yet I couldn't shake the reality of her presence. I sat up, breathless, the whispers of Sarah echoing in my mind. Was this ghost a warning? Was she trapped in this floating prison, reaching out for someone to hear her? Determined to find answers, I spoke to the crew the next day. I approached a young staff member named Mark, who seemed somewhat willing to chat. "You've heard the stories, haven't you?" I asked, trying to gauge his reaction. He glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Yeah, I've heard some things. But you know how it is. People like to embellish." He smiled nervously, but the look in his eyes betrayed him. There was fear there. "Just be careful. Not everyone comes back from her." As the days rolled on, the ghostly sightings multiplied. A couple reported seeing her in their cabin, and others spoke of cold spots and unexplained flickers of light. On the third night, I decided to join a small group of passengers who planned to investigate the ship after hours. We met in a dimly lit lounge, adrenaline coursing through our veins as we shared our experiences. "Tonight, we'll find her," said Emily, a bold woman with fiery red hair. "We can't let her spirit linger. She deserves peace." With nervous laughter, we ventured through the darkened halls. The ship creaked and swayed, and I felt an overwhelming sense of foreboding. Each step felt like we were intruding on something sacred. I could hear whispers in the air, an ethereal chorus that sent shivers down my spine. It felt as if Sarah herself was guiding us. We arrived at the ship's bow, the cold winds whipping around us. Suddenly the temperature dropped drastically, and we all huddled closer. A flickering light illuminated the area, and there she was again, Sarah, standing at the edge of the ship, gazing out into the dark abyss of the sea. Her expression was one of longing, of sorrow. "Sarah!" I shouted, unable to contain myself. "We're here for you." The apparition turned, her eyes locking onto mine. I felt a profound sadness radiate from her, wrapping around me like a shroud. And then I heard it, a whisper, clearer than ever. "Help me." Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently, plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through the group as we stumbled back, but I couldn't tear my gaze from her. "What do you want?" I cried, feeling utterly helpless. As if answering my question, the lights steadied, revealing a scene I couldn't comprehend. Sarah pointed toward the water, her face a mixture of despair and urgency. It was then I realized her death hadn't been an accident. Something had happened here, something that bound her to this ship. She needed us to uncover the truth. Just as I reached out, the lights flickered once more, and she dissolved into the shadows. The group erupted in chaos, but I was frozen in place, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. Whatever had taken place years ago was far from over. In the following days, the ship's atmosphere changed. People were talking, sharing their own theories about Sarah's death. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the ship's corridors like a distant storm. Some passengers began experiencing odd phenomena, doors slamming, cold drafts that left them breathless. It was clear that Sarah's presence was no longer a mere legend. With each passing hour, I became more determined to uncover the truth. I dug through old logs, interviewed crew members discreetly, and pieced together fragments of Sarah's story. She had been a vibrant young woman, full of dreams, until her life was cut short in a tragic event. The more I learned, the more I felt her spirit guiding me, urging me to bring her story to light. On the last night of the cruise, I stood on the deck, gazing out into the vast darkness. I felt her presence beside me, a comforting weight that filled the void of fear. "I will tell your story," I whispered, feeling the cool breeze wrap around me like a promise. As the ship sailed away from the icy shores of Alaska, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's spirit would always be tethered to the Star Princess. Her whispers would linger in the hearts of those who had felt her sorrow, and her story would echo through the ship, a reminder that some pasts refuse to stay buried. The sea holds many secrets, and Sarah's was one that I vowed to carry with me, forever haunting and forever compelling. I never thought a dream vacation could turn into a waking nightmare. As I stepped aboard the luxurious Oceania Insignia in 2009, the sun-drenched Caribbean awaited, promising turquoise waters and endless relaxation. The crew greeted us with warm smiles, their enthusiasm infectious. Little did we know, an invisible enemy lurked among us, poised to strike. At first, everything seemed perfect. Days melted into blissful afternoons, spent lounging on the deck, laughter mingling with the ocean breeze. But that tranquility shattered like glass when passengers began complaining of nausea and upset stomachs. Initially, we shrugged it off as mere food poisoning, something that happens on cruise ships, right? But as the hours turned into days, I watched as the number of sick passengers skyrocketed. The ship's doctor, a harried man with dark circles under his eyes, soon realized we were facing something far worse. The symptoms were alarming: vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and respiratory issues. Each day brought new cases, and with them a creeping dread settled over the vessel. I could hear the panic rising like a tide, and it seeped into our hearts. Then the dreaded announcement echoed through the ship's PA system: a norovirus outbreak. The words sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly we were trapped in a floating Petri dish, and the crew's efforts to contain it felt futile. Panic spread like wildfire. Whispers of fear darted through the hallways, and I could almost taste the anxiety in the air. Confined to my cabin, I listened helplessly to the sounds of retching and moaning reverberating through the walls. The once vibrant atmosphere morphed into an eerie silence, punctuated only by the hurried footsteps of masked medical staff. I tried to distract myself with thoughts of the sunny beaches awaiting us, but they felt impossibly far away now. As days blurred into an endless cycle of fear and sickness, I felt the walls closing in. The ship, once a palace of luxury, had transformed into a floating hospital where fear and despair thrived. Meals were slid under my door by crew members who wouldn't even meet my gaze. I could sense their fear, too, their faces masked, eyes filled with concern. One night a low moan echoed from the cabin next door. I pressed my ear against the wall, heart racing. The sound was pitiful, and a wave of helplessness washed over me. I wanted to call for help, but who could I call? The crew was overwhelmed. They were fighting a losing battle against an enemy that struck without warning. The virus became a monster, indiscriminate in its cruelty. Children cried for their parents, and old couples held each other tightly, knowing their time was running out. It felt like a horror movie unfolding in real life, and I was trapped in the center of it. I wondered if I would be next, if I would join the ranks of the sick and dying. The uncertainty gnawed at me. One evening, a knock on my door startled me. It was a crew member, his eyes wide with urgency. "We need to test you," he said, his voice shaking. My heart sank. I knew what that meant, confirmation that I was part of this nightmare. As the doctor approached, clipboard in hand, I felt a surge of panic. "You're exhibiting mild symptoms," he said, avoiding my gaze. "You may have been exposed." I wanted to shout, to cry, but instead I felt a numbing resignation. My world had shrunk to this cabin, and the thought of being confined even longer was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, and despair dripped from the ceiling like the sweat beading on my forehead. After what felt like an eternity, the ship finally limped back to port. I could see the familiar shoreline, a beacon of hope. Yet, as we disembarked, the reality of our ordeal weighed heavy on my shoulders. The ship underwent rigorous disinfection, but the scars we carried were invisible, etched deep within us. I stepped onto solid ground, but the fear remained. The laughter and joy of that first day aboard were replaced by memories of suffering and uncertainty. The ocean, once a place of beauty, felt tainted. I had hoped to find freedom in the waves, but instead I found that even in paradise danger lurked. The story of the Oceania insignia haunted me, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most perilous battles are fought against an enemy we cannot see. The vacation that promised tranquility had turned into a nightmare, and I would carry its lessons for a lifetime. That luxury is fragile, and our lives can change in an instant, all thanks to a silent, deadly virus.